everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Welcome back to our vegetable garden here in Spokane, Washington. The hardiness zone is 5B to 6A. Now this is an exciting day because I get to do the big reveal. Our entire vegetable garden is planted, finally, and I have to tell you, we have had very challenging weather that has gone from cold to hot to cold to hot to cold to cold to cold, and so the plants are struggling a bit, but they're starting to look better. So let's go through with garden and I'll show you what we're growing. This is the bed where we're growing green arrow peas. You might recall that I start them in rain gutters, and then when it's planting time I slide them out into 2 trenches in the bed. They have been struggling just until recently, probably because of our crazy weather, but they've got pods all over the place. There's lots of flowers, so we're going to have some nice harvests ahead. You'll notice I've got some shade cloth over the lettuce bed, and that's because with our recent warm-up, I want to stretch the harvest for as long as I possibly can, and giving them some extra shade helps. Let's take a look at how they're doing. Fava is the variety of lettuce I'm growing. This is actually my 3rd year of growing it, and I am so sold on it because the heads are so prolific. And I'm using the cut and come again method, which means harvesting individual leaves rather than a whole head, because once you harvest a whole head of lettuce, that's gone. Now, one of the things I want to emphasize throughout this video is how economical it is to grow your own food. So in the case of Bauer lettuce, the seeds cost me 7 cents each, which is a little bit more than I normally would pay, but it's worth it. So I'm growing 17 heads of this lettuce for a whopping $1.19. So yeah, it's very economical to grow your own food. Next up is my Swiss chard and beet bed. You'll notice it's under a cover, and that's because Swiss chard, beets, and spinach, which are all in the same plant family, are very susceptible to leaf miners. The adult is a fly. It lays eggs on the leaves, which hatch into little maggots. They tunnel through the leaves, just ruining them, and then they drop down to the soil surface for a while and then emerge as adult flies to start the problem all over again. So let's see how they're doing. I think they're looking great. So this is a rainbow blend of Swiss chard, and what I did a few weeks ago is I thinned the seedlings to a spacing of about 6 or 7 inches so these would have enough room to grow. This of course will be something where I'm harvesting a leaf at a time, so this will give me harvest throughout the whole garden season. And then the beets, I've got 2 rows of them, both golden beets and cylindra beets. I did the same thing, I spaced them, but in the case of beets, just to a 3-inch spacing. Okay, let's talk broccoli. The variety is Belstar, and the reason they're under agricultural insect netting is because I'm trying to keep aphids and cabbage worms away, and it works beautifully. Let's see how the plants are doing. This year I'm growing 8 plants in this bed. Last year I grew 11 in the same amount of space, and these plants just grow so large I decided to downsize a bit to 8. So the plants are doing great. They haven't started forming heads yet, but it should be pretty soon. And then also, if you'll notice at the bottom, there's a copper ring at the base of each broccoli plant, and that's to keep slugs away because they can cause a lot of damage. So the skin and antenna of slugs reacts electrically with the copper, so they want nothing to do with the plants, which is great. This was a DIY project that Bill and I did. We used a scrap piece of 3-inch diameter plastic drain pipe, cut it into 1.5-inch tall rings, and then you can buy paper-backed copper tape to put around the outer perimeter of the ring. It works great. You can see I'm growing corn and some marigolds in the next bed. That was not originally in the plan. I was intending to grow edamame for the first time ever. I planted the seeds and they never came up. I gave them a few weeks, and that is just so odd. I'm hoping it's just a fluke, but I thought, you know, we've got some extra corn seeds left over from planting the main bed. Why don't I just plant another bed of corn? You can see this next bed is covered with floating row cover, so that's an alternative to agricultural insect netting. And Bill is growing some vegetable crops in here that are susceptible to aphids and cabbage worms. You can see these taller plants have bolted to seed. They are Bopak pak choy, and it's a little unusual for them to bolt to seed this early, but we did have that big warm up, and I think that's what caused it. He's also growing some turnips and radishes in here, and these beautiful little plants are a type of pak choy that we haven't grown before called green fortune. Now wait till you see my crazy bed of red Russian kale. I started them from seed using the winter sowing method, and boy did they grow. So do you want to know what a deal those are? I calculated that there are about 20 plants in the bed, and each plant has cost me 12 cents. I bet you can't go to the grocery store and buy that much kale for 12 cents. Okay, here is the famous bean arbor. I'm growing a pole bean called Vortex, and what they will do is grow up and over this trellis, and they are so productive. So I learned something interesting the other day. Bush beans will only give you 2 or 3 harvests, and that's it. These will produce the entire summer, all the way until it frosts. So I think that pole beans are a much better deal. And I love how I can grow them up and over a pathway in my garden, because that means in the summertime when the beans hang down on the inside, I get to stand in the shade while I'm harvesting them. I should also mention that these little plants are celery. This is Utah improved variety, and as near as I can tell, each seed costs me 1 penny. I'm going to be harvesting celery the entire season. When was the last time you bought celery at the store for 1 cent? These next 2 beds have my paste tomatoes, and those are the tomatoes that you can use to, I've got some little chickadee buddies here. It's the type of tomato you can use to make things like tomato sauce, salsa, and ketchup, and that's because it doesn't have a ton of moisture in them, and so the sauce becomes very thick very quickly. So the 2 varieties I'm growing this year are Blue Beach. That's a new variety to me, and the reason I picked it is because I heard from a friend who's growing it that it is less susceptible to blossom end rot, so that's a plus. This other variety is Supremo, and that is a variety that I grew last year and was extremely happy with. The other thing I wanted to point out is the way I'm growing the tomatoes. So I've got a sheet of concrete reinforcing wire here. It's a grid, and then it's tied to 2 heavy-duty metal fence posts. And all I do is either weave the plants in and out as they're growing, or I use twine just to keep them next to the support. I've used this for quite a few years now, and it works great. This is our squash arbor, and it's made with cattle panels, also known as livestock panels. And if you want to see how we put it together, which is very simple, just check out my early video that was the start of the growing season, and you'll see how we moved it from another bed, because we're strong believers in rotating where our crops grow to prevent insect and disease problems. I wanted to show you the planting layout. So in this row, I've got autumn frost winter squash. I've grown it for years, and it is fabulous. And then this row is a new to me variety of kabocha squash called sweet jade. So I'm very excited to grow it. Now, if you look at where the seedlings are, this is on the north side of the arbor, and these are on the north side of the arbor. And what we have learned over the years is that the vining plants tend to want to grow toward the south. So if we put each of them on the north side of the arbor, they should grow much better up and over the arbor. On the other side of the arbor bed is where Bill is growing some very special tomatoes in containers. And I'll put the names of the varieties on the screen for you. We're growing Yukon Gem potatoes in cloth grow bags, and the bags are the 15-gallon size if you're curious. We put the seed potatoes down in the bottom on about 3 inches of soil and then covered them. And then once they grew some foliage, we filled in more soil around them. They grew more foliage, we filled it in, and now we're almost to the top of the bag, and when we are at the top, that's when we can stop putting in the soil. But they are doing really well, and pretty soon we'll be having some tubers in there. Right behind the potatoes is the carrot and parsnip bed, and you can see they are doing great. I thinned them a couple of weeks ago, and they are looking very nice. These are the parsnip plants, and you might recall when I planted them, they were older seeds, just maybe 2 years old at the most, and so I thickly sowed them, and as you can see, I just have about a dozen plants, but I'm okay with that. You'll notice the toy snake here. I've got a few of them in there because the quail have been coming in and pecking on some of the leaves. I'm hoping they're stopping doing that, but that's really annoying. Here's the garlic bed. Look how tall it is now, which is awesome. And it is doing really well, but I want to show you something really important. If you're growing hardneck garlic, especially for the first time, you might see these weird kind of stalks that are coming out of the plants. These are called scapes. And what's happening is the plant really wants to bloom. Well, you don't want it to take that energy away from the bulb that's developing down in the soil. So what you do is wait for these flower stalks to form a complete curlicue and then clip them off right about here. And don't put them in the compost pile because they are absolutely delicious. We use them in cooking every summer, and oh, they are just an extra treat. And just because you can never have too many tomatoes, especially those wonderful little grape tomatoes that are so much fun to eat and also put in fresh salsa. Bill is growing a few extra plants. We've got Valentine, Solano, and Pandarino. You'll notice this next bed has floating row cover over it. It's not to keep any insects away. I've just been babying my small melon plants. So let me show you what they look like. Here you go. So I've got 3 Tuscan Napoli cantaloupe plants and 3 Alibaba watermelon plants and a couple of marigolds thrown in for good measure. Uh-oh, it just started sprinkling. Let's hope it doesn't get any worse. So in this bed, Bill is growing a whole bunch of onions and 3 extra pepper plants. Now you know Bill's growing more than 3 peppers, right? He's known as the Pepper King. And inside our little hoop house, he's growing all different varieties of both sweet and hot peppers. Here's some on one side and on the other side. And they're all growing great. And yes, we're growing even more onions with a few radishes thrown in here and there. And we've also got some shallots in the bed. This is my pumpkin bed. I'm growing Spooky and Big Macs. I have a couple of ground cherries thrown in and a few zinnias. Now if you're wondering about this chicken wire structure, I have young sunflowers in here, and because the quail love to munch on them, I decided to give them a head start by giving them some protection. In this bed I'm growing 2 Cocozelle zucchini plants. We've been growing that variety for the last few years and it's wonderful. And then these 4 plants are burpees, butterbush, butternut squash. So a bush butternut, it doesn't take up much room in the garden and it's very productive. I can see I need to weed this bed, by the way, but with these weeds, it's easier to pull them out when they're a little bit larger. So I do have a strategy. And then more zinnia plants at the front and more protection for some sunflower seedlings. I'm growing fava beans in this bed, and the flowers are so interesting because they're black and white. You almost never see black flowers, right? In this last bed, I'm growing corn, and a couple of weeks ago I shot a video on everything you need to know about growing and harvesting corn, so you might want to check it out on my YouTube channel. So far the plants are doing okay. We have had extremely challenging weather lately, as I mentioned, high winds, lots of cold, then a little bit of heat, and you know, they're just getting off to a slow start. But I think they're going to do okay. I recently shot a video on how to assemble and plant Greenstalk vertical planters. And so at the end of the video, I promised that I would give you updates every now and then. So here's the first one. And the plants are doing great. They're settling in nicely. It's just been 2 weeks maybe at the most. And I'm seeing a lot of new growth on them, which is also great. These are watered automatically every day, just 1 minute. And I can tell that they're all thriving nicely. Phew, we made it to the end of the garden tour. And if you hung in there with me to the very end, way to go. I hope that your gardens are doing great. Thanks so much for watching today, everybody. Happy gardening.